All right, what's going on, macro perspective community? I'm gonna change it up a little bit, Seamus. Call him the TMPC. Um, we have an amazing guest today, Toby with Neuroflex Florida. That's his IG handle, and I probably would suppose those are your other handles too, right? Other socials, Toby. Am I right in
For
saying
sure.
that?
I'm pretty heavy on IG, but yeah, you can check me out at YouTube. I think Neuroflex is the YouTube channel, but pretty much Instagram's where I do everything.
Yeah, that is the landing pages of landing pages these days. You don't need a website; you just need an IG. That's what all the marketing geniuses say, right?
So I've
And
heard.
and I mean, you're about to drop some knowledge bombs related to all things neuro related. You mentioned before coming out on here today that you have something dropping as of tomorrow. So we're excited to kind of let people know about that. Sounds like a really interesting concept, and I'm gonna let you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience for us.
Okay, for sure. Well, first off, thank you guys so much just for the invitation. I'm super happy to be here talking with you guys. So yeah, I my background is basically in neurophysiology research. So I got involved in this space at my college research lab, learning how to measure and analyze people's brainwave activity. So our brain waves are the electrical rhythms that our brain generates that drives our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and really all of our cognitive abilities. So I became really fascinated with a biopsychology class I took in undergrad and kind of just did a deep dive into my research lab and just learning everything that I could about the brain, how the brain functions on a biological level, because I really was like wanting to change my own brain, my own mental health. I struggled a lot with social anxiety growing up, terrible social anxiety throughout like middle school, high school, into college. Dating was like impossible for me, and I just like really struggled socially. So I kind of had the realization that it was like my awkwardness and social anxiety was sort of more a result of the way my brain was functioning on a biological level rather than who I was deep down as a person. And that's kind of, as I was learning more and more about the brain and learning about neuroplasticity and the fact that we can actually change our brain, we can rewire our brain. I started figuring out that, all of the symptoms that I was experiencing were just, byproducts of the way my brain was functioning. And through the use of different modalities, such as neurofeedback, neurostimulation, maybe some psychedelics too, I was able to definitely rewire my brain and, definitely don't really deal with any social anxiety anymore. I talk to people at conferences. I walk up to people at conferences and introduce myself and say, a bit about my story. And they're like shocked. They're like, wait, you're saying like social anxiety? Like, it's not really a part of, what I experience anymore. And I think that, everyone is dealing with something, whatever people are dealing with, it's, oftentimes there's a biological root. And if we can improve the way the brain functions, then all the things people are suffering with, anxiety, depression, PTSD, bipolar, all these things, I think we can greatly improve by tuning up the brain. So that was kind of, my introduction into this world and just my interest getting involved in the space myself.
Whoa.
Man, that's like a fire way to do it. I mean, that's a deep rooted why. Because I mean, Marcos and I can attest to like maybe why we got into fitness because that's our background, or nutrition coaching because there's a pain. There was like a pain or a block that wasn't allowing your full potential, and it sounded like the social anxiety was that thing. Because people they feel guilty or they might feel shame like they identify I am the social anxiety, and it's like, nah, you're not, that's just a byproduct of like this thing, and this is how you're doing. um I'm so excited to kind of go into this talk. You have no clue. I was telling Marcos, I was like, man, I'm super excited to go deep in this guy's brain basically. um
Go
I
for
know
it.
your background was like the neurophysiology research and stuff like that, but when I came across like your social media, Neuroflex Forward on IG again, I see these things, right? Like I see people with caps on their heads. I see like these brain informationals and things like that. Um, can you kind of break that down for the audience and kind of like what's going on there at like a basic level? Obviously, there's, you're certified in this. This is what you're trained in. But for like the basic person on the general level, what's going on there?
Yeah, so that's a great question to just lay the foundation. So basically, there's two components of what I do. There's the assessment component, and then there's the training component. So as far as assessing people's brainwave activity, you guys may have seen on Instagram those caps, those swim cap looking things are kind of dorky, that sit on people's heads. And they basically measure the electrical rhythms that the brain is creating, the brainwave activity. It measures the five major brainwaves: delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, which all have different functions, which we can get into later if you guys want. But I'm assessing basically 19 different areas of the brain, seeing if there's activity that's too low, too high, or perfect, healthy amounts of activity, as well as measuring the balance between the left and right hemisphere, looking at how different networks in the brain are communicating, such as like the default mode network. So I'm assessing a whole lot of metrics on the neurophysiology data that we can collect by measuring these electrical rhythms that the brain is generating. So after we do that, that kind of gives me a full roadmap of like understanding, what someone is dealing with kind of on a biological level. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, I'm really struggling with my focus, I can't concentrate, I think I have ADHD, and then we see their frontal lobes are really underactivated, then, that kind of like we put two and two together. It's kind of matching both people's subjective experience of the world, their symptoms, with the neurophysiology data. And that usually kind of paints a complete picture of what's going on. And then I can design personalized protocols utilizing all these different neurotechnology modalities to actually rewire the brain. So there's different technologies. We can get into the specifics if you guys would like, but basically these technologies do a few different things. They balance and improve the brainwave activity. They increase production of certain neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, different things that help our mood, our focus, our productivity, and then also boosting blood flow and oxygenation to the brain. So by increasing cellular energy production within the mitochondria, you can greatly increase energy in the brain. And there's actually a great book that came out earlier this year. I highly recommend to you guys and all your listeners. It's called Brain Energy. It's by a Harvard psychiatrist, and it talks all about how pretty much he kind of links every psychiatric disorder. There's roots within metabolic dysfunction. People think of metabolic dysfunction as obesity and diabetes and different issues with their body, but actually when the brain is not functioning properly metabolically, there's all of these sort of mental health complaints that people view as psychological issues, when in reality we're learning more and more there are so many biological drivers of this. So that's yeah, there's a lot of different ways I could go about answering that. Hopefully that just provides a bit of an overview. So let me know
I'll let
wherever
Marcos
you want to
with the
go.
follow up. I'll let Marcos with the follow up. We'll see how this trails along.
Yeah. So I noticed that you didn't go alpha, beta, theta, or like it wasn't that, like in order. Why is that? Like that's like my first
Oh,
question. Why is it the naming that way?
oh, so I just went slowest to fastest. Like sometimes I'll like go fastest to slowest, but yeah, I mean, if we were talking about the fastest of the brainwaves, gamma, and then beta, and then alpha, theta, and then delta. Maybe I messed
Mm.
up when I originally
No,
spoke it
no,
in reverse, but I'm not sure.
no. I think you said it right in the reverse order too. But like, I'm also intrigued why gamma is the fastest and not alpha or vice. Like, who know? For one, the nomenclature just seems backwards. Like for whatever reason. If
So
that's the well, yeah,
yeah,
maybe you have a reasoning behind it.
I don't know. I don't know like why they named each brainwave the way they did, but basically it's all based on the frequency. So measuring in hertz, like how many cycles per second each of these waves is oscillating. So like delta waves are the very slowest of the brain waves. They occur like 1 to 3 cycles per second. Now comparing that to gamma waves are upwards of 40 cycles per second. So
Mm.
the nomenclature is really just to define the speed, the frequency of all of these different waves.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, interesting. So you immediately went slowest to fastest like that. Like there was a a method to the madness is what I was trying to get to. I was like, there's a reason why he said it in that order, and I'm wondering why. But my follow-up question is, so you mentioned like that cap. What technology do you utilize? And the only ones that Seamus and I have had the pleasure of utilizing in clinical applications have been the WAVI unit, and I'm sure you may or may not be familiar with it. But it was like when I got that training, I was like blown away at like how much can go on with like an EEG, type of reading, and all the different waves and how it can influence, and like even just like detecting eye movement from like brain waves, like as part of like poor, like quote, poor feedback in like the test that we were administering. And that was like what happened to me as I was the test subject. It was like the person was like, I didn't have you stop it so I could show you the faults, because it's much easier to then know what to now look for as it like pops up on a reading or things like that, which I thought was super fascinating. So like, what device is it that you're using?
So I use an electro cap. That's like the brand name, but these are basically the gold standard caps that are utilized in research. Started using them in my research lab back in college. Pretty much every single clinic that I've been a part of always uses these electro caps. So I think like, the dry caps, the Wavi and some other technologies are cool. There is some debate as far as excuse me, as far as like the accuracy goes. So when I talk about like dry versus wet caps, basically the caps that I use, you have to squirt some electrogel into each of the electrodes, wiggle it around to get a proper connection. Whereas some of
Mm-hmm.
the other devices, they do, I think, use a little bit of gel, but they're different. And I don't know, there's some debate within the neuroscience community as far as the accuracy of some of those other caps go. So I just stick to like the old fashioned. These electro caps have been utilized in clinical research and clinics, for the past several decades. So yeah, I mean, they're definitely not the sexiest, pretty retro looking, there's like a blue red, there's like the medium caps, looks like something from the 90s. But
Yeah.
as far as the functionality goes, these things are definitely the gold standard.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to ask about that. Like, so that's like how you do the assessment, and obviously, you're taking someone and you're trying to figure these things out. Like, an assessment really isn't like that long, is it? It's probably like less than like 30 minutes, right, to truly figure out if someone is reacting this way or this is the thing that's going on with their head. So it's a pretty seamless test, right? Like you could kind of go in and kind of go out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's super non-invasive. It's doesn't hurt people whatsoever. It's not like you have to hop in an MRI or CAT scanner at all. You just put the cap on, get some gel in, make sure the recordings are clean, and then I process the data and basically upload. So I basically am recording what's called like a raw EEG. So, those squiggly lines for each of the different brain waves, that's what I see on my screen. It looks like a bunch of squiggly lines, and people aren't really going to be able to make too much sense of that data. So, there's a different software that I run all of that data through that then transforms it into these heat maps. So we can actually visualize to see areas of the brain that are too low or too high in each of the different brain waves, and shows me connectivity between different networks. So that whole process is pretty quick, though. I mean, within doing the recording, setting someone up and capturing the recording may take 30 minutes or so, and then I process the data, and then I spend another 20-30 minutes usually going over the report with my client, depending on how in depth they want to go. But yeah, the whole
Yeah.
process is pretty quick.
I had a question on that because Marcos and I were talking about this. The heat maps or those amplitudes or whatever, um, Marcos, you probably follow up as well. Is that like, I've seen the brain mapping, right? Like the one we do with Wabi, and it's like this one is, more red, which indicates like more output, and then this is a little bit blue, which indicates
Yep.
like not as much. Um, that's basically saying like, okay, this is the area that's probably turning on a lot during this test, and then this area is not as quote unquote on. I know you can't turn it on and off the nervous system; you'd be dead. But more like it's giving more frequency. Is that kind of fair to say?
So it can get a bit complex because, like, for instance, if there's overactivity within, say, delta waves. So delta is a brainwave associated with deep sleep. When we're like completely unconscious, that's when our brain produces a lot of delta. But if someone has a lot of delta, if there's like a lot of red in the delta brainwave frequency at like a specific area of the brain, that is not indicating like that the brain's like hyperactive. That's overactivity in that super slow frequency, which basically indicates that area of the brain is offline. So
Oh,
when there's waking delta, that's basically an indicator that there's been a past head injury or significant neural inflammation. So there's a bunch of kind of nuances to it. So there's, overactivity within the slower waves is kind of like, the brain is running kind of slow, and then overactivity in the faster waves, the brain is kind of more activated,
yeah.
hyperactivated.
I want to say one more thing, and Marcus, you can follow up. Because you kind of said something there, Toby, which is like insane. So with Wabi, I think they did like multiple case studies and like a concussion study. The power of this, and I just want the audience to kind of listen, but like the power of this is like you said something about a concussion or like a brain injury. They were doing like tests, and they can't give out who did they did this test with, but they did it with a football team. I believe it was a professional team. And basically there was two people roughly the same time. One had a concussion, the other had a concussion, right? And on the brain test, they saw it was confirmed, yeah, concussion. They did a concussion protocol, and concussion like brain testing and other things to, these sports performance guys are making millions of dollars. They're getting them to heal much faster. One person was cleared after 3 weeks, right? Cleared because the brain test after numerous tests said he's okay. The other person, they kept on running brain tests on for another 9 weeks, and he wasn't cleared yet. But guess what happened? Guess what the coach did, the head coach did?
Mess with the data to get him to play.
He made him play at 3 weeks still. Or something, because that was like quote unquote like don't quote me, but like quote unquote like that's the enough time for him to feel healed, but he still wasn't after 9 weeks. So isn't that like crazy? Like you have this direct test saying that he's not good, but because millions of dollars are on the line, they're gonna play him anyway. So it's like, oh man, it was just like insane to me. I was like, no way, but they did, and it was just like a wild case study.
Yeah.
Where have we heard this story before?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's sad. Like, CTE, is a serious condition where people who've had all these head injuries from football or, UFC, boxers, all these guys that, when the brain gets hit repetitively, it's like these concussions become cumulative. And when you've suffered a concussion, if you don't allow your brain the time to fully heal, if you have another concussion within that period, it builds off of like the damage, like it becomes that much more impactful, or detrimental. So yeah, I definitely think like these sports teams, I'm sure they know they could fully be able to assess. They have neurologists and all these people I think on staff, but millions of dollars on come into play, and there's probably going to be some I don't know, some funny business going on,
Or some ignorance.
yeah.
I heard that the highest concussion rate is actually in soccer, though.
I heard that
Is that
too.
true? You've heard that?
I'm not an expert in concussions, but I do remember hearing that from someone. So,
and it makes sense because like you're heading a ball that's coming at you at a pretty good rate of speed, And I was like, when I thought about it more, I was like, I believe it. That's interesting. I would never have thought it. Like,
yeah.
I can imagine as the game it gets as fast as it is, like at that professional level, that the way the speed at which the ball's coming at you, the speed at which you're moving, and hell, like okay, a quick aside, like I was playing soccer with my son, and my wife like hit my shin with like her foot or whatever it was, and I literally wanted to just like roll over on the ground and like literally just sit there like in agony like they do, like, and I was like, yo, like F this, like my ankle is like fucked right now, like this. Like I was like, oh, like I have a deeper appreciation. Maybe they're not faking it, maybe they are, I don't know, but all I know is that this sucks right now. Um, and the the fact that like that sport again has, you know, CTE rates or whatever, kind of beside the point. But I think the other thing about these like different measurements of waves, and you kind of alluded to it, was uh, the fact that like different ratios, right? Different ratios of different waves can indicate, I mean, not necessarily diagnose, but like kind of tell you about certain conditions. You want to talk about a few of those ratios? Because I found that that's super interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you're exactly right that it's not, the brain mapping itself is not a diagnostic tool. A lot of psychiatrists or neurologists will use it to aid in a diagnosis, but just looking at a brain map itself, you can't specifically like mind read. You can't tell, you know, someone exactly what they have. But in terms of like those ratios and like there's certain what we call signatures where someone has you know, an excess amount, for example, with ADHD, people usually have an excess amount of theta waves compared to beta waves. So the theta to beta ratio is actually a clinical biomarker of ADHD. So basically, theta waves are slower waves associated with drowsiness, inattention, kind of mind wandering. It's sort of a foggy, kind of almost trance-like state. And people with ADHD oftentimes have an excess production of those slower waves and an underproduction of beta waves. Beta waves are what enabled us to like focus, concentrate, have really like sharp laser focus. So that balance oftentimes gets altered with people who suffer from ADHD. And so for that's one instance. What I would say one of the most common signatures that I see in the clients that I work with, which are mainly like executives, entrepreneurs, you know, very like high achieving people, very type A driven people that are kind of just burning the candle at both ends, will oftentimes see an excess production of faster beta brain waves. So beta, there's sort of what's described as like good beta versus bad beta. Good beta is like the slower beta wave frequencies, without getting like too in depth into the science behind it. But basically, the faster beta brainwave frequencies are described as bad beta or high beta, and these waves are sort of indicated in like anxiety, ruminating thoughts, sometimes obsessions. So it's basically that sympathetic nervous system being overactivated, that fight or flight response that oftentimes, like a lot of people, you know, just in our society, we kind of are chronically living in that fight or flight state. So that's like probably the most common finding that I'll see on people's brain maps is an excess production of those high beta waves. And for those people, we're usually helping slow the brain, helping increase alpha wave production, which is a brain wave associated with relaxation. So there's different signatures, you know, for all sorts of different conditions, and that's why, you know, doing brain training such as like neurofeedback, it's kind of like shooting in the dark if you don't start with a brain map, because you know what
Mm-hmm.
might work for you, Marcos, you know, is actually could actually be detrimental to Shamus. It really depends based on each person's unique neurophysiology, what people are going to respond best to. So that's why it's so
Mm-hmm.
essential to start with the brain map, measure people's brain waves, see what's going on, and then you know you can give people personalized protocols to optimize their brains, you know, on kind of an individual level.
So, okay, like not to diagnose my wife, but I do it a lot on the show, so she can, if she ever listens, she can out me. She maybe like based on some of the things that you mentioned about like that higher anxiety state, ruminating type of thoughts, kind of makes me wonder if like again, if some of those things, do you find that a lot of the times those like quote symptoms, right, or those things, do they usually directly correlate to like that finding of like that beta excess or particular signature excess that you're mentioning? Like if you have, I know it's not exactly always one to one, but if you line up a lot of them, do you more often than not kind of find that after however many years you've been doing this?
Yeah, I mean, usually so. I would say there's different subtypes of different conditions. So Dr. Daniel Amen, who's one of the kind of pioneering figures in, you know, brain imaging, he does SPECT scans, which measure blood flow and oxygenation, whereas we're measuring the electrical activity. They correlate pretty closely. So in Dr. Amen's work, he talks about there being a bunch of different subtypes of, say, ADHD or anxiety, depression. So, for instance, with your wife, it's very, very likely that she would have an excess production of those high beta brainwaves, but it very well could be different areas of the brain that could be involved. It could be the frontal lobes, it could be the parietal lobes, it could be coming from the occipital lobes. And then there could also be, deficiencies in alpha, which is sort of the brake pedal of the brain, helping slow the nervous system down, or it could just be mainly overactivity within beta. So there's definitely different subtypes. There's a general pattern, but it's kind of like finding where in the brain that activity or the dysregulation is emanating from, to be able to best put together a protocol to help train the specific areas of the brain that are not working well. Because there's going to be a lot of areas of the brain that are functioning just fine, and you don't really need to train those areas. So it's the brain map, can help us see, for someone dealing with anxiety, which specific area of the brain is contributing to those symptoms.
Is it do you think it's a two-way street? Like what, like this is the chicken and the egg kind of analogy. Like did the hormone like offset, like hormones like fight or flight, cortisol get upregulated and have dysfunction and then lead to brain issues, or did the brain issues happen and then lead to the hormone dysfunction in your opinion?
I think it all works hand in hand. I mean, when we're in that fight or flight response, like as you're mentioning, there's a release of hormones such as cortisol. There's the increase in the faster beta brainwave frequencies. So it's kind of the brain's response to that fight or flight. Whereas cortisol, I guess also a hormone, but released in the brain. But yeah, I think all these things are working together. The brainwaves aren't just operating in isolation. There's the neurotransmitters, there's the neuromodulators, and there's the brainwaves that are all, and the hormones that are all kind of working in synergy with one another.
Interesting.
My question is then, like, how do we train, like, for example, Marcus's wife? what's that brain training like? Let's say for that specific
right
one.
Yeah, I get. We can. So Toby, I could just say like, there's like again ruminating thoughts, likes to go down the rabbit holes, doesn't know how to like stop the brain. Activity happens like kind of at night. I know you don't have like a mapping of it, but like she gets fixated in these like anxiety states and like then can't fall asleep, right? Like, is there, again, I know you don't see the mapping or what's going on there, which would give you a better prescription, but like what would someone do to kind of rewire that type of brain, that like those type of thought patterns? Because I'm always working on it with her and I'd have no clue. I'm like, I'm not an expert here.
Right. So neurofeedback is one of the major technologies that I work with. So whereas the brain map or the EEG is simply measuring what the brain's already doing, the neurofeedback goes one step further. It's picking up the different brain waves, but then it's also giving people feedback based on how they're doing. So for instance, Marcos, with your wife, if we're wanting, potentially what we're probably going to see is that excess production of those high beta brain waves and maybe a deficit within alpha waves. So we would likely want to help increase her production of alpha and decrease her production of high beta. So imagine that we put an electrode, usually when we're wanting to train alpha waves, we put it at a location called PZ, which is kind of the parietal lobe, kind of towards the back of the head, where alpha is mainly being generated. And then your wife would basically play kind of a video game with her brain. So how that looks is that so you're hooked up to all the equipment, it's picking up your brain waves, and then based on how you're doing, say for instance you're either like flying a spaceship or driving a car, and so I would program that we want to reward your wife's brain when she produces more of those slow alpha waves associated with relaxation, and we're going to sort of punish her or not reward her, the brain, when it gets into that high beta brainwave state. So when she starts producing more alpha waves, the car would accelerate or the spaceship would accelerate, and then when she got into that high beta brainwave pattern, the car would stop, the spaceship would stop. So it's providing the brain real-time feedback within 100 milliseconds, which is actually quicker than our conscious mind can even process information. So it's very much rewiring the brain on a subconscious level through operant conditioning. So basically giving the brain a reward when it's producing the desired rhythms that we're wanting to train, and then removing that reward when the brain deviates from that state. So by doing that, time and time again, you're basically training the brain to create these new neural pathways and to change the way it's firing on an electrical level. So once you do, a series of sessions, it usually can take 20, 30, 40 neurofeedback sessions to really do a comprehensive training program. But in that amount of time, you've basically given the brain this completely new baseline. You're teaching from the very first session, it's kind of teaching the brain this new way of firing. But obviously, as you guys know, say with like fitness, if someone's not regularly working out, and then they go to the gym one day, it doesn't matter how hard they lift, they're not going to wake up the next morning looking like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, right? Like, so neurofeedback is also, a process, just as, physical training is. Brain training is a process that takes time, but the more you do it, the greater those benefits become and the longer lasting that they are. For instance, someone say, Marco, say with your wife, if we're, wanting to reduce anxiety, help calm her mind down, she might notice like during the session, or maybe for 30 minutes or an hour after the session, she might notice, feeling really relaxed. And then, that anxiety may very well come back. But after we start doing 3 sessions, 5 sessions, maybe those benefits start lasting for a day after doing the sessions. And so once you get into 10, 20 sessions, it starts becoming longer and longer that people experience the benefits, until you've really got enough sessions under your belt where you really kind of cause pretty permanent changes in terms of rewiring the brain.
Two follow-ups then. So one, how are you stimulating a response to get the alpha waves if it's just the game that's controlled by your head effectively? Like, are there prompts or something that has to go on? Like, how do you just start thinking about something in a different way? Like, how does it just start firing?
Right. It's basically, alpha waves are associated with relaxation and kind of being in that flow state. So when we start ruminating and having all those monkey mind thoughts, our brain usually accelerates into beta waves. Whereas when we get into that flow state where we're just kind of being very present and mindful, our brain starts generating more alpha. So for instance, when people meditate, their brains start producing a lot more alpha waves. So think of this as just giving people feedback, say, on their meditation. Are they doing it right, or are they doing it wrong? You could meditate and you could sit on a cushion and meditate, and really, you're just thinking, you're planning out your day, you're thinking about all the things you have to do. It's not really meditating. So, this can provide direct feedback when the brain is actually getting into a relaxed state. Or on the other hand, if we're wanting to train focus and we're wanting to increase people's beta waves, then, we can do that too. So it's not giving any external stimulus to the brain. It's simply telling the brain when it's in the desired state and giving it that reward, and then taking away the reward when the brain deviates from that state. So does that make some more sense?
That sounds so
Dude.
bananas that it's like there's
Dude.
non-provoked response though. Like, I get what you're saying. It's like, all right, like so people just sit there in the first session and you're just like, this is what's going to be rewired, and this will move when you actually reach this state, and that's all you give them, and they just like kind of sit there, like, more or less.
Yeah, it depends. When we're doing relaxation training. So actually, also, oftentimes we'll do relaxation training with someone's eyes closed. So in that case, we would do more so auditory feedback. So we basically, encourage someone to, take deep breaths, sometimes do like some box breathing, but just getting into a really relaxed state. And then they would basically hear tones that would increase when they get into a more relaxed state. And those tones would get really quiet when they got out of that state. So you can do it either visual or, auditory feedback. But yeah, in terms of, you can, yeah. However, it depends what state we're training, but usually I don't give a ton of instruction to people because it's not a conscious process necessarily. It's not, you can't really think your way into neurofeedback training, because as I was saying, it's giving your brain feedback within 100 milliseconds, so quicker than our conscious mind can process information. So really, it's like the brain gets this signal when it's, doing well, and people, will get that reward, they might not even consciously realize like what it is they're doing, what they're thinking that's causing them to get that reward. It's a deeper subconscious process.
I
It's
could
too
see
deep
why
for
you
me,
got
Marcos.
fixated. I know. I could see why you got fixated on fixing. I mean, honestly, like it's so interesting because it's like kind of sounds like snake oil sales in a sense, because it's like it's unprovoked. It's like it's just like a state of like understanding what that is, and like you just said, like almost creating like a Pavlovian response, like you said, like
Mm-hmm.
getting that treat or that stimulus, that like again, like having the auditory feedback or the visual stimulus feedback to like be like, that's what I'm supposed to be chasing. And it's that you don't even know what it is. Like that just sounds, I mean, that sounds like magic. Like honestly,
So
it's crazy.
So interestingly, like a lot of people haven't heard of neurofeedback. I think the marketing behind it has not been great. There's no huge neurofeedback companies, so it's still sort of like I guess, alternative treatment or training. But in reality, neurofeedback is nothing new. This is not some brand new technology that I created. This is something that's been studied. I mean, the first EEG recording was done back in the 1930s, and
Mhm.
then the technology since evolved further and further, and neurofeedback really took off in the 1970s and 1980s, treating kids with ADHD. So there's a bulk of research surrounding the treatment of ADHD, but also you can find neurofeedback research supporting the efficacy of neurofeedback in terms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, insomnia. There's peak performance research showing that you can improve creativity and flow states. So there's all sorts of research on it, and actually there's huge organizations such as like the Department of Defense that actually uses neurofeedback training to increase learning speeds amongst like snipers. They can actually
Yeah.
increase the speed in which these snipers are able to acquire the skills. So even though it does sound, when you first hear it, it does sound kind of like magic or whatever. But there's actually quite a lot of science behind it. It's nothing new. It might be
Yeah.
new to
Yeah.
people when they hear about it, but neurofeedback's nothing new at all.
I wanted to
Well,
follow up because you kind of talked about a lot of things there on the neurofeedback, but like, I mean, I kind of knew about this stuff. I read into like Norman Doidge, the brain that changes itself, the brain that heals itself, and I've always liked to kind of play with flow states because I've always been playing with that since I was young. For college, flow into peak states for performance on the mats or in sports or whatever. Um, my question is, there's a few things. I have a few questions now, Toby, but like you're the person that's gonna like confirm it for me. But like binaural beats, like are those the question on that is like obviously you're using isochronic tones or different tones, and you could pull up on YouTube right now. Like if someone's type A CEO, Marcos's wife, Ruminator, they can throw up alpha beats right now on YouTube and have that playing in the background, like as they work or something like that. Is there actual efficacy to that, or is that kind of more,
Yes.
just
Yeah,
kind of out there?
no, there's definitely plenty of research behind binaural beats, but I'm always a bit skeptical of the stuff on YouTube because it's like is you can't really tell whether there's the accurate binaural beat technology behind whatever the track is that you're hearing. So there's
Mm-hmm.
some reputable companies that manufacture or that produce binaural beat tracks. So that's actually something that people get in the program that I offer. I send them some binaural beat tracks that basically take your brain from most of us just having, say, this interaction right now. We're mainly producing beta waves. Betas are normal alert awake state. So these binaural beat tracks take the brain down from beta into alpha into theta, and then eventually actually into delta, which is associated with an advanced meditative state that often takes years for people to be able to actually get into a delta state while they meditate. But through the use of this neurotechnology, you can actually entrain the brain to create those same rhythms. So there's absolutely efficacy and science behind binaural beats. And there's actually, I think Andrew Huberman talked about the 40 hertz binaural beat. That specific rhythm they've found now can really improve people's focus.
Okay.
Um, I think
There's
yeah, also 40, but yeah, Yeah. So there's definitely research behind it. It's just the stuff on YouTube. It's kind of like I don't know whether it's legit or not.
Yeah, there's like Brain FM and Brain FM and like other companies I know that are logically or study based backed, and like I know there's like a membership or like some things like that, and I've used them before and all that. My other question is magnetic resonance, or kind of utilizing like certain helmets or something. I've kind of heard about. I don't know if you know about this, but like utilizing like magnetic frequencies or putting a cap on or something like that. That also helps. Is that something you're
Yeah.
familiar with?
So PEMF, it might be what you're referring to, like pulse electromagnetic frequency.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I'm not an expert in that, but I used to use that. I worked at a rehab center in Deerfield Beach, where we'd actually do basically neurostimulation, where you're passing like a very low intensity electrical current through the brain to stimulate blood flow and oxygenation. And we'd actually pair that, we would layer that on with these PEMF coils, which really help reduce inflammation. So people can put them wherever on their body. There's a lot of like PEMF mats, and there are some brain devices. So I think there's good research behind it. I've seen a lot more as far as research goes with like that technology and different things within the body. I'm not sure if the stuff within the brain has progressed, as much as some of the other modalities that I utilize. So PEMF, I mean, I think it's a cool technology, but I'm not sure that that we know a ton as far as the brain benefits.
Gotcha.
I can
Go ahead, Marcos.
like the, how much do we know about the brain?
Oh man, I mean, you know, if we're comparing what we know now to what we knew 20 years ago, it's like massive. But compared to what we're going to know in another 20 years, we're going to look back and be like, man, we didn't know anything. So I think like that to me, that's one of the coolest things about neuroscience, is that it's such an evolving field. For I don't know, like if we're studying, like, I don't know, a doctor, what do they call it, a nephrologist, I think, who like studies kidneys or whatever. It's like we probably know just about everything there is to know about kidneys, right? It's like it's an organ that's relatively simple, that we can measure, we can track, whatever. Whereas the brain is like the most complex thing in the universe. So like there's so much complexity to it, that I think, like, to me, that really drew me in. The fact that it's always, we're getting closer and closer to, like, you know understanding more and more. But at the same time, there's core tenets of like the way the brain functions that are still being debated, like things like consciousness, where we can't necessarily have a super solidified, like, this is how consciousness works. There's different theories, different neuroscientists and philosophers and all sorts of people have different ideas around consciousness. But something like that, like the most basic thing of like how our entire reality is created, I can't give you an explanation of how that is working in the brain. So there's still so much we don't know, to be perfectly honest. But I think that's really, to me, one of the coolest things about being involved in neuroscience. And just seeing the research that comes out every day, is I can then apply that and utilize different training protocols that have been studied. That's what I really focus on, is trying to apply the research that's done in clinics and research labs, and bringing that to like real world applications. But yeah, we're gonna look back in 20 years. If we watch this interview 20 years, we're gonna be like, damn, Toby didn't know anything about the brain.
Is it kind of safe to say that the brain research and understanding is kind of following Moore's law, where it's kind of doubling in terms of our understanding each year? You know what I mean? Like similar to like technology in that sense. Would you say
Yeah,
it's growing at like an exponential rate as we have more access to technology that can map things and algorithms and AI? Like, is that?
absolutely,
Yeah, I can only
absolutely. I mean,
imagine.
things like Neuralink, like what Elon Musk is doing with like the brain chips. I mean, that's the next level. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I don't even, get too involved in all the AI stuff, but it's definitely where, all this stuff is going for sure. Machine learning.
Well,
Wow,
that
man.
brings me to kind of my next question here is like, you said we don't really know like what defines consciousness or being sentient or free thinking or those things. Like, I mean, I guess if there was ever a machine that could quote like completely map everything one to one, like if this is basically a really high level mapping problem for math, right? Theoretically, right? Like you could then create something that is free thinking, even though it was not human or had a brain in the beginning, in my eyes. I don't know if anybody thinks of it that way because I think it's maybe a little bit of a sci-fi twist to it. But from my from my I know, well, from my background, it's like it's a mapping problem. It's like understanding what maps to what, right? Which is really like I mean, it's a high level math thought, even though it's really simple. Um, like as weird as this question is, this is relating to a mapping problem. Like how many colors, what's the smallest amount of colors you could use to have different colors for each state on a map?
Each state,
So
like,
well, each state, like they can't touch, the same color can't touch, right?
So 50 states
mhm.
or well, 48.
You have all, yeah, like what's the minimum amount of colors that you can use?
I'm not sure I
Right.
understand the question.
So if you've ever seen let's just look at the map of the 48 states, right?
Okay.
And you remember like as a kid, you see them all have different colors, right? There's the same
Yeah.
colors, but they're never touching one another. Like, how did
hmm
they figure that? Like, again, like this is like a rudimentary kind of question to mapping, right? Because like in order for you to understand like what can't work, like each state is like represented with a dot, and you just like start drawing lines, and lines can't intersect essentially. Um,
These are
and again, that
rules.
might be
Yeah, like these are
it's just
rules
simple.
that
It's just like
like
simple.
yeah,
Yeah, and
I
somebody's
would say like
brain
four.
figured that out, right? What's that?
Four?
Four? Yeah, I
Uh,
want to say it is four, but like but you had to like observe and create these mappings, right? Like that's like the visual example. Now I don't how many. I mean, Toby, how many neurons roughly are in a brain? Like,
Oh, it's in the billions, or actually maybe trillions. I'm not good with remembering specific statistics, but yeah,
yeah,
there's quite a lot.
wow. So then it's just I think it's just a hardware problem, like a data storage problem to like actually map a brain to a computer. If it's like each one takes
we
up
just need
one
quantum
byte of
mechanics.
information. Yeah, you
Just
need
need
quantum
quantum
Yeah,
mechanics.
computing. You need
Yeah.
quantum computing.
yeah.
There's another one, Toby. This is gonna mess with you. This is like more sci-fi again, kind of like what Marcos
Go
is
for it.
talking about. So brain readings, obviously brain diagnostics. This is I got trained on this by somebody at Wabi, and they talked about. He's like, this is a conceptual. This is thought. This is like think thought, kind of just like there's a concept here where what if we mapped out enough brains with this brain cat, right? And then you get to the point that you map out so many people that you start recognizing the patterns of murderers. Okay, just follow me here. Stay with me here. That's like a weird story. But they were starting to think like, what if people had data because everyone has their data on a cloud now, or on your phone now, and you do this brain map, and it's kind of like that Tom Cruise movie back in 2001. What's that movie called? Marcus, you know which one that is? Oh, man, I'm blanking on it. But like they can kind
Tom
of
Cruise.
theorize like, yeah, man,
Was it
it's
Edge of Tomorrow?
no. I'm blanking on this one so much, but like basically the concept is um, based off of certain algorithms on this person, based on this person's brain reading. Oh, they're going to be a murderer. Do you ever think like this is a sci-fi question? Do you ever think we could get to that capacity with our with like the brain readings or anything like that? Do you think that's like something like oh because of these specific brain patterns, this person's a murderer, but he didn't do anything yet. The person didn't do anything yet. It's just like it's just a subjective like it could happen. So we're gonna take him out of society.
I mean, in a way, we're already there. So let me give you a for instance. So I have a friend who I used to work with who he worked with a psychologist on death row, basically doing brain maps on inmates who were being charged with, they're on death row for murder usually. And basically the defense attorney, they were trying to use in certain cases the defense of, they having like fetal alcohol syndrome if their mothers
Mm.
drank heavily during pregnancy. So they actually mapped out there's certain signatures that can be detected with the brain maps. I'm not an expert in that condition whatsoever. I know hardly anything about it. But what my friend was doing was basically, collecting that data. The psychologist would assess those recordings and say, this is a brainwave pattern that is either associated with fetal alcohol syndrome based on the data that we know, or it's not. So in those cases, it was actually used to, in certain cases, defend inmates on death row because of a condition that was impairing their brain from the get go. So
Oof.
yeah,
Oh man.
I'm not an expert in any of that stuff, but I know all of that exists.
Wow. By the way, the movie was Minority Report. I don't know if you guys ever saw that one, but that's the one with Tom Cruise where basically based on, again, like what you're saying, like they studied the person's brain or the person's like based off their actions and algorithms, they're likely to make this choice, maybe to murder someone or uh, do something. And I don't know. It makes me think about if the brain is just neurotransmitters, neurons, and hormones playing a game, it kind of makes me sometimes question. And like you said, we can't really define consciousness. How this is more of a philosophical question. And sorry to the audience, this is just the way my brain works. But like, it makes me question like free will. You
Oh
know?
yeah. Oh, totally. I think about that a lot. I mean, I think like I used to, before getting super involved in neuroscience, I used to think like, oh, we have complete free will over, any choice, I'm choosing everything. But at the same time, I mean, that was coming from a place where, I mean, my brain was functioning pretty well. I mean, versus, I mean, take the case of someone with fetal alcohol syndrome, who doesn't have that cognitive capacity. So it's like, how much of that is free will? For certain people, our brains are just functioning; they're just wired, in a certain way on a biological level, and that enables us to have a lot more forethought and be able to plan out, decisions, organize our thoughts for the future, plan out things, very much the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that sits like right behind the forehead. That area of the brain is kind of it's kind of described as like the most human part of the brain, because in other primates, the prefrontal cortex is way smaller in relative
Mm.
size compared to humans. So the prefrontal cortex is really what enables us as humans to, really like create everything we've created, to, bring thoughts into reality, into existence, to, plan and make judgments and inhibit impulses, all of these things. So, for certain people, like people with ADHD, their prefrontal cortex is underactive. So, I mean, theoretically, like you could kind of argue that those people have less of an ability to make, the best possible decision compared to someone with a really healthy prefrontal cortex. So I think free will is just very relative, and I think like there's so much that goes on in terms of our decisions, like, like going, this is switching gears completely, but like it relates, like talking about like sales, where people, they talk about how people buy from an emotional state, they don't buy based on logic. So it's like, how much of that, I mean, if we're seeing ads that are like triggering our emotions, and then we don't know why we necessarily like chose to buy a product, but there was all this like subconscious messaging going on. I think like concept that we're completely, you know, deciding everything from a conscious place of free will, I don't think, I think it's very relative. And I think different people have different amounts of free will. And I think even kind of the amount of free will we have is very dependent on a lot of things, such as, like how much sleep we've gotten. Like you guys know, like how it's like, if you've got 2 hours of sleep, think about the decisions that you're going to make. Think about how you might be way more prone to like have an angry outburst at your partner, or, a coworker, like whatever, just based on the amount of sleep we got. So it's like, we can't,
That
I mean,
that's what that. It's not an angry thing for me, Toby. It's just eating everything in sight.
There you go.
Yeah, the food.
It goes out the window.
Damn, dude. Damn. Man, thank you for answering that, because that's honestly like a thought of mine. But yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
No, that's interesting. Like the free will thing and like the development of like you just mentioned, that prefrontal cortex and the different sizes and like what makes us like quote human relative to other species. My like so kind of like circling back a little bit here though, right? So doing a session and like 40 of them, like what is the relative cost of that? Like I'm like, because like I'd be super fascinated. I'm sure people are like, okay, like a lot of the things that are actionable here like obviously require like a specialist, right, in order to kind of get like that subconscious rewiring.
Yeah.
Is it affordable to the masses? Is it something like super niche, like you kind of mentioned, and it's a little more expensive because of like the expertise required to handle data and then like kind of like get that sub programming done? What does that look like?
Right. So that was really a big problem, kind of, and it still is a big problem within the field of neurofeedback. It's oftentimes like very, very expensive to do, say 30, 40 sessions. Usually insurance doesn't want to touch it, for different conditions. Very hard to get neurofeedback billed through insurance. So, that was a problem that I was running into, just in my own company. And really the solution that I found is doing virtual. So by doing like this virtual program, I just directly ship people the hardware that they're able to do basically a mini brain scan, and then actually able to do the neurofeedback sessions completely on their own as many times as they want, like in a month. So it's basically a subscription model, but people can do as many neurofeedback sessions in a month. So I mean, in 1 month, if you train every day, there's 30 sessions. So it dramatically changes the costs associated with neurofeedback to be able to do this virtual program. So there's different tiers that I'm sort of in the process of building out, but there's definitely like a very, very more economical option that is going to be available for the majority of people. So I think the virtual option is solving a lot of those problems associated with needing to do in-person training, because once people know how to set themselves up and run sessions on their own, they don't necessarily need my direct oversight. I'll go over people's progress and design protocols for them, but I don't need to be so actively hands-on, actually putting on the electrodes, coordinating in-person sessions with clients. So yeah, the virtual is going to take the cost of neurofeedback down quite a bit.
That's
Is
awesome.
the hardware super expensive? I mean, obviously, like
It depends. It depends kind of what hardware you're talking about. For neurofeedback, oftentimes you have to like have like an amplifier, which is what's used to like record the brainwave data. Those can range from 5 to 15,000, and then there's different software programs. So it's definitely like somewhat of an expensive like upfront cost, but there's not really much overhead. You have to buy more paste and electrodes, but there's not necessarily a ton of overhead doing working with the hardware. But yeah, these devices that are going to get shipped out to people are relatively inexpensive, kind of commercial grade devices, but are still able to pick up and be able to detect and train a lot of that same brainwave activity that I'd be doing in person. So it's definitely just an evolution of the technology and able to make it smaller and more affordable.
yeah,
I love it, man.
amazing. I mean, all right, I got two more, and then Seamus, you can have the last one. First one is like, what have you seen the show on Netflix, Quarterback, by chance, Toby? You
Oh,
watch?
I haven't seen it, but I know Kirk Cousins, the Minnesota Vikings quarterback, he got featured doing neurofeedback, and he got featured doing the exact same neurofeedback. That software is the exact same software I'm using for the virtual program. Funny enough.
Okay, so that's where my head went. So okay, so
Yep.
it is related to that exact thing of like
Yep.
getting whatever response to help with like his in tuneness for the game, right? Okay, cool. That was the first
Yeah.
one. Second one, really quick is, can you explain like voltage of the brain and like low voltage versus high voltage for me? Like this is a personal question. I forgot to ask the person who kind of gave us the training. I know like more voltage is better, right? Question mark.
Potentially. I mean, a balance, I'd say a balance between the different brainwave, voltages, and being able to produce more of a brainwave in, the state that you're trying to be in. For instance, being like voltage, I sort of think of as like the power of these different brainwaves. So there's the frequency, how many times per second they're occurring, but then there's also the voltage, the strength or power, the electrical power of those frequencies. So when it comes to different states, when people are producing more of like, say, alpha waves, the voltage then increases say within their alpha wave. So it's a measure that's, I sort of think of as power, and voltage is not necessarily like, people talk about like low, like a brain that has low voltage, which usually involves like underactivity throughout all the different brainwave frequencies. And that's usually associated with metabolic dysfunction, like issues with energy production within the brain, where there's just low voltage, there's not enough cellular energy production, so there's just diminished voltage, diminished strength of all these different brainwave frequencies. But in general, it's good to have a balance. You don't necessarily want the highest possible voltage. You don't necessarily want the lowest. It's a matter of when you're in a state where you're trying to relax, you want greater voltage within your alpha waves. When you're in a state where you're trying to focus, you want greater voltage within your beta waves. So it's very dependent upon the
power
state.
Dependent.
Yes.
So I mean, technically, the brain is throwing out electricity. Where does amperage get factored into this?
The amps. That's I need. Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, with different like neurostimulation technologies I utilize, there is like a milliamps of like the electrical current that's getting passed through the brain. So that definitely relates. I'm not an expert on like the neuro. I don't even know exactly what to call that.
Electricity is why I did not become an electrical engineer, man. I was like, I don't see shit, so it's really hard for me to visualize.
Right.
I was like, get me out of this
dude.
class.
I know the exact. Dude, honestly, I'm telling you right now, that's why like I skipped. Like I had to do physics because I thought I was supposed to do like physics for like physical therapy. Once we got into like magnetism and relativity of like waves and stuff, I was like, I'm out. I'm out. I don't get this stuff.
I just chose to reject physics altogether. There was the option senior year of high school to do either anatomy and physiology or physics. And I was like, I'm doing anatomy and physiology. And that actually was like a really interesting class and got me really
You made the right call.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll let the people.
Yeah.
And me being the asshole I was like, nah, I'm opting out of both of those because they're not technically required. I'm having two electives, creative writing and student aid, a math class, and whatever
Smart guy.
course it was.
Smart
and
man,
literally
yes.
cut out of school and got that 4.8 GPA and call it a day.
There you go.
I'm gonna call it here just because Toby, I know we need to have a hard stop right now. So what we'll do is Toby, thank you so much, man. Seriously, thank you so much. I mean, for me personally, like, and Marcus and I, just because this is the stuff that we do day to day, like, you literally answered all our questions, and we probably do a follow up. But we want to make sure we're supporting you guys. You can find Toby at Neuroflex Florida on IG, and he's coming out with his new thing. We'll link all the stuff in the show notes. But guys, this is definitely one you want to re-listen to, think about again. Hit up Toby if you need, if you're in the Florida area, and obviously he's going to be more virtual. But like, comment, and definitely share and subscribe if you guys want to learn more. But other than that, team, thank you so much. Toby, thank you so much again.
Thank you guys so much. You guys ask great questions, and hopefully your audience has, a bit more understanding of just how their brain functions, and know that there's actually these technologies available to rewire their brains and improve whatever they might be going through.
Awesome.